Hi, Professor Craddock. I am MD Imran Hussain. I'm currently an internal medicine trainee working in East Lancashire Hospital's NHS Trust. I'm really interested in hematology, and you have been a real idol of me, and I'm really honored to have this short interview with you.
Well, it's lovely to meet you.
Was there any particular incident or any particular sort of area? How did you get interested in hematology?
Well, I was lucky enough to work as a houseman for a guy, a really remarkable man called David Weatherall, who was not only a brilliant scientist, a real innovator in genomics. It was really walking around the wards with Sir David that made me realise how important the human contact and how important it is for patients to feel that you're really prepared to do anything for them, go the extra yard. And nobody could have expressed that better than Sir David. So he really was the inspiration, not just for me, but for many, many people.
How did you enjoy your training? Like I can understand from your expressions that you really enjoyed your training then.
Well, so initially I totally hated it, right? Because I was an SHO in various general medical jobs, mostly in London, locked up at the weekend. This was when, we had to do quite a lot of menial tasks. I started off at the Hammersmith Hospital, and I was really lucky. As a registrar there, I had a call from an old boss of mine when I was at Oxford called Nick White. He's now Sir Nicholas White, who's a tropical disease clinician. And Nick has also been an inspiration, I think, to many of us. So he rang up and said, we're doing a project in the Gambia to understand what's the best treatment for pediatric falciparum malaria. So Nick was very frustrated that the WHO had said that in Africa, all parts of Africa, chloroquine shouldn't be used and quinine should be used for falciparum malaria. Well, the problem with quinine, of course, is it's expensive and it's systemic and it's really complicated to deliver. And Nick was really frustrated because, of course, particularly at that time, there were large parts of Africa, particularly Western Africa, where chloroquine worked really nicely. So the WHO wouldn't listen. They didn't get the fact that this was a really big issue in Africa in terms of delivery. So Nick said, okay, we're going to do a randomized trial, okay? So he rallied the troops, and I was one of the guys with Sanjeev and various other people, and we just went out for 2 months. So Lucio Luzzatto was my boss at that time, said, yeah, go, this is important, just go. And so we arrived in Gambia, and it was tough. And it was pretty hot and pretty dirty in the hospital. But we had the privilege of working on this team that randomized children with severe falciparum malaria. These children were really sick. Some of them died in your arms. To chloroquine or quinine. We did the randomized study. And we were able to demonstrate that there was actually no difference. And in fact, that therefore subsequently changed advice. But I think really then I kind of came to admire Nick's sort of pioneering zeal. Again, it's a bit like John Goldman, putting the patient absolutely. This had to be done, and it didn't matter how difficult. But also kind of the real power of a randomized study, which I've come to realize. It's an obvious statement in many ways, but once you start randomizing patients, you generate data that's so much more powerful.
And you have been organizing and leading many clinical research.
Well, yeah, so then I went to Oxford and worked for a tremendous scientist, a brilliant man called Doug Higgs, and he was terribly supportive of me. I wasn't a very good scientist and did some really interesting work on alpha globin and chromatin structure. And hugely grateful to Doug, and then went to Seattle to do a postdoc in a lab in Seattle, Thalia Papagiannopoulou. But the bit that I really enjoyed in Seattle was actually working at the Fred Hutchinson Center and kind of skilling up on transplant and leukemia treatment. And then I came back to London, and in 1999 the opportunity came to move up to Birmingham. So we started up quite quickly in Birmingham a clinical trials program. We had no funding for research nurses, so we had to set up our own charity. And we quite quickly had a research nurse network in the region, and were able to push through some really quite nice clinical trials in leukemia and myeloma, which got published. And we showed in that first 6 years of a pilot that just by funding a facilitating hub in Birmingham in the trials unit and putting research nurses into 13 centres across the UK, creating a catchment region of 25 million, we were able to deliver 1,100 patients to 21 practice-informing prospective clinical trials with embedded genomics. And then we were aware that in transplant we also had a challenge. So you know that 50% of patients who have an autologous or an allogeneic transplant fail. They fail because of toxicity or they fail because of disease relapse. Working with Anthony Nolan and NHSBT and a charity called Luca, we thought, well, hang on, we need to try and look at this. So that was an opportunity to set up Impact, which we opened in 2017. And same principle, trials facilitatory hub, upfront research nurses in 10 hospitals picked through a peer review process and other hospitals joining the network. And again, we've been able to show rapid recruitment to pivotal randomized trials, which interestingly now are attracting industry support. So the global pharmaceutical sector is increasingly seeing our resource and our ability through the brilliant Hem-Onc community of nurses and docs to accelerate delivery of trials once you put in the infrastructure, the research nurses, as something that is actually they find difficult to access elsewhere.
I mean, you have done many works in genetics and epigenetic mutations. Nowadays, and previously we didn't used to go for all the genetic sequencing and everything. Now that there is this genome project, there is new therapies coming in and we are checking for FLT3, IDH, and those new drugs are coming in. So how do you think that, in which direction are we going? Will there be some day where we will sequence the whole thing and say, okay, you get this drug, you get this drug?
We've got world-class science in these areas, and it clearly has the potential to inform treatment decisions. But it's really important that we're integrating it with clinical trial assessment. So there are two implications clearly. One is all diseases become a rare disease. If you're looking at genomic stratification, it's very likely that that will be important. So we have to really build huge catchment regions, and that's what TAP and Impact have done, if you're going to have a chance to assess these therapies in a genomically defined environment as quickly as possible, one. And the second implication, I think, is that there needs to be a very speedy exchange of information between clinical trials and the genomics so that you can start to define exactly what you've said is are the population, AML would be a good example, are the particular populations who respond well, say, to Mylotarg.
How do you see hematology in maybe 60 years? Like, how do you think that which way are we going now?
If you look at the pace of progress, I think there's a lot of these blood cancers that we currently, until very recently, viewed as incurable, which I think are going to be entirely manageable as an outpatient. As John Goldman would say, you at least have an operational cure. And then finally, I think also, understanding of how hematological disorders like clonal hemopoietic disorders, as David Steensma and others have shown, impacts on general medicine in terms of ischemic heart disease and morbidity in other manifestations is going to be really important. So I think there's going to be much greater interaction between general medical disciplines and what we call non-hematological disorders with actually fundamentally driven hematological diseases.
In terms of people who are still undecided, wants to choose hematology maybe, what would you say to them? I mean, every specialty has some sort of characteristics in an individual which drives them. What, in your opinion, would drive a person towards hematology?
Yeah, so I think it's fascinating, all right? You either find it fascinating or you don't. But it is pretty extraordinary when you see a patient and then you understand the biological basis and then there's an intervention. So that's one thing. The second thing is, I think, these are tough jobs, all right? But they're worthwhile jobs. You make a difference. You have fun. You interact. So I think it's also your personality. Where are your priorities? And for some of us, a lot of people, the idea that actually you're serving patients and putting them first, and the rewards that you get back are so rich, that's really what makes us get out of bed. And I think if you have people who find the spread of haematology fascinating and also really are excited by the opportunity to change outcomes, and that's what's happening, not just in malignant, but in non-malignant disease, then that's a pretty special job, actually. It's very difficult to find jobs that give you that.
So we're here to discuss the BSH 60th anniversary.
Yeah.
So how do you think that BSH impact has been over the hematology community here in UK?
I think it's, in the last 5 years, reconnected with its real constituency, which is haematologists up and down the breadth of this country, trainees up and down the breadth of the country, and also other allied clinicians and colleagues. Perhaps there was a moment where it may have forgotten the pivotal importance of a national society in helping really hard-working haematologists in very busy centres access the best information, but also do more than that, I think, understand more about trials and also network. And so I think what's happened with the annual scientific meeting is just fabulous. I can see that going from strength to strength, and increasingly bringing into it allied meetings of particular special interest areas.
If you were to give us a word of encouragement for the trainees who are already in training, or what would you say to them? What areas would you ask them to focus on?
I would just remind each of us every day that you make such a difference. My wonderful father, who was classics master and didn't come from a privileged position at all, went into West Middlesex Hospital on a Saturday to see my aunt, his sister, who was having an operation and her eye that went wrong. And he was terrified for her. He didn't have the money to get private care or anything. He was very dependent on the NHS. And it was lunchtime and the consultant did a ward round, and the consultant came over to see him and stopped and had a 5-minute conversation. And my father said to me, when I was wavering about medicine, he said, never ever forget the capacity that thoughtful, kind doctors have to completely transform not only patient outcomes, but also families and infrastructure. And that's really kind of, I think that's fundamentally true. We don't recognize how a good consultation or a good inpatient admission has so many reverberations, and patients are very vulnerable. We are their advocate. We must be passionate about being their advocate in terms of optimizing trial delivery, in terms of optimizing access to genomics, but also in terms of giving them that simple care, attention and passion towards the fact that they're the most important person. So I think I would say to trainees, you're in one of the best jobs in the world, you're pretty smart, you've got a great set of attributes, enjoy it and realize how much good you're doing.
Is there anything, any inspirational stories that you can tell us?
I think the most important thing is to care for your patients as much as you can, go the extra mile, integrate science and be ambitious.
Be ambitious.
Be ambitious for patients. Patients drive everything.
And in terms of developing the care of the patient, you have mentioned a very important role of research nurse.
I think the workforce that we've got at the moment, kind of the model is from about 25 years ago. It's a bit out of date. I think empowered nurses are a big part of the future. We now have my great colleague Ram Maladi, our transplant director, set up a late effects clinic led by a very smart nurse. It's just so much better. Patient care is so much better than the stuff I was routinely dishing out, all right? So I think nurses, I think pharmacists are the other key, and really encouraging consultant pharmacists. So again, actually, BSH has been good in terms of encouraging us to think really quite radically about what's the workforce look like in 2019. And I think there's quite a lot we could do to change that for the better. It's all around teamwork and empowering people, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. Thank you so much, Professor Craddock, for giving us your valuable time. It has been a real pleasure meeting you. Thank you
It's
so
been
much.
great meeting you. Thank you.
Thank you.